Kristi Noem didn't stumble. She didn't hesitate. She looked straight at Congress and made it clear that the Constitution was optional. When Senator Chris Murphy pressed her with the most basic question, do legal permanent residents have the right to free speech, she wouldn't say yes. She dodged, she deflected, and she hid behind bureaucratic jargon. And when the Supreme Court ordered her to release a man unanimously, 9-0, she flat out refused. Think about that. A U.S. official openly admitting under oath that she won't follow the highest court in the land. That's not leadership. That's not policy. That's raw defiance of the rule of law. And the shocking part, she said it all out loud, in front of the cameras, daring anyone to stop her.
As they've gone through an evaluation of who gets a visa, who gets legal status, green cards, they've been evaluating and discussing how that applies.
Well,
to people
I acknowledge
that are in
that
this
you don't.
country.
I acknowledge you don't make.
Right.
But if someone is a legal permanent resident of the United States, I'm not talking about an H-1B or a student visa holder. I'm talking about a legal permanent resident. If you are a legal permanent resident, do you have the right to detain or deport that person simply for expressing their political opinion?
The Department of State makes those decisions.
No,
and the
they
Department
don't.
of Homeland Security.
You make that decision about who you have the right to detain or deport. So you are involved in that? Do you believe the United States, do you believe the law allows?
The Department of Homeland Security under the Trump administration is enforcing the law, following the constitutional rights of folks who are here as citizens, those who are here legally, and those who are here illegally.
So a legal
that
permanent
have
resident
final
is by
removal
definition
orders.
here legally. Do you believe, I mean, I think this is really troubling if you can't answer this simple question. Do you believe that the U.S. government can detain and deport a legal permanent resident for expressing a political opinion that the administration disagrees with?
The determination you're asking for is based on things that you are determining that the Secretary of State has considered and evaluated. We don't evaluate that, the administration, along with a partnership with the Department of State, on what is political speech and what's an affiliation with a foreign terrorist organization.
Do you believe?
That's the difference between
Do you
the two
believe
that you're asking
that you
me.
can detain
We
and
follow
deport
the
a
direction of
legal
federal
permanent
law.
resident for expressing a political
We have
opinion?
not detained we have not deported anybody who's a legal permanent resident or a citizen of the United States.
Then say you don't have the ability to do that.
We have
clarify that for
is
the
true.
millions of.
That is exactly what I'm doing, is that we have followed exactly what the law is, and that we have not detained or deported anybody who's a citizen or has legal status in this country. We are focused on the worst of the worst dangerous criminals.
You do not believe you have
to get them out of the country.
You do not believe you have the ability to do that.
We have not done that at all, and the Trump administration has no plans
Well, just
to
because
do
you haven't
that.
done
We
it
do
doesn't
not
mean
do
that
it.
you won't do it in the
We
future.
are following
Do you
the
believe you have the
federal law
ability to do that or
ensure
not?
that we are doing
I think you were going to.
the
I
exact
think
appropriate thing in partnership with the Department of State and in partnership with the Trump administration.
Have you read I assume you have read the Supreme Court decision in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia?
Yes.
That court decision requires the administration to facilitate Kilmar Abrego Garcia's release from El Salvador. Can you describe the steps that you have taken to facilitate this release? And specifically, can you answer as to whether you have reached out to your counterpart in El Salvador to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's release?
Abrego Garcia is a citizen of El Salvador and should never have been in this country and will not be coming back to this country. There is no scenario where Abrego Garcia will be in the United States again. If he were to come back, we would immediately deport him again because he is a terrorist, he's a human smuggler, and he is a wife beater.
You've read the Supreme Court decision. Does the Supreme Court decision not require you to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia?
The Trump administration is complying with all court orders and judges' orders.
Does the Supreme Court order require you to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia?
Is a citizen of El Salvador. It is up to the president of the El Salvador to make the decision.
You're a defendant
on
in
if
the
he
case.
is coming back. It's been a big topic of conversation between all of us, between the country. When the president visited the United States of America, it was discussed and talked about there. The president has been very clear on this issue, as the Secretary of State, and I have as well. Abrego Garcia is not a citizen of this country and is a dangerous individual who does not belong here.
I will end.
Let me be
I will
clear that if
not
you-
ask another question,
If you
Madam
were
Chairman.
back
But the
in this
discussion,
country, we would
but
immediately
the discussion
deport him.
ends when the Supreme Court rules 9-0 that you have to facilitate his release. And the fact that you can't even acknowledge the wording of the order, which commands you to facilitate his release, and you advertise to this committee that you are going to willfully ignore the ruling.
It started with what should have been the easiest question in American democracy: can the government deport a legal permanent resident simply for expressing a political opinion? Senator Chris Murphy asked Kristi Noem for a yes or no, but instead of answering, she spun in circles. She said it was up to the State Department. She said they were focused on the worst of the worst. She said the administration was doing the appropriate thing, but she never said no, and that silence said everything. Because if she admitted permanent residents do have free speech rights, it would expose the administration's game, and if she said they don't, it would be headlining news around the world. So she chose to dodge, leaving Americans to wonder whether the First Amendment still applies to millions living legally in this country. Then came the moment that stunned the entire chamber. Senator Murphy asked about the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling in the case of Kilmarco Garcia. 9 justices, from every ideological corner, ordered the administration to facilitate his release. That kind of decision leaves no room for interpretation. But Kristi Noem didn't blink. She branded Garcia a terrorist, a smuggler, even a wife-beater, without offering a shred of evidence in that hearing, and declared he would never be allowed back. It wasn't a slip. It was open defiance of the highest court in the land. Imagine that a U.S. official saying out loud that a 9-0 ruling doesn't matter. If one Supreme Court decision can be brushed aside like an inconvenience, then the entire foundation of checks and balances begins to crumble. And Noem wasn't apologizing, she was doubling down. Defying a Supreme Court ruling isn't just unusual, it's unthinkable. Even presidents who disagreed with decisions have ultimately followed them, because that's the backbone of the system. The court interprets the law, and the executive enforces it. But Kristi Noem shattered that expectation in a single sentence. By rejecting a unanimous decision, she didn't just challenge one case, she challenged the very authority of the court itself. This wasn't a debate over policy or interpretation. It was a declaration that constitutional limits no longer applied if they conflicted with her agenda. That's the kind of move you expect in countries where strongmen decide what laws matter and which can be ignored. And yet here it was, happening in real time, in front of the Senate, with cameras rolling. Noem wasn't hiding it, she was daring anyone to stop her. Kristi Noem's defiance wasn't just about one ruling, it was about testing how far executive power can stretch before anyone pushes back. By refusing to honor a unanimous decision, she sent a message: rules are optional if you control enforcement, and that's where the danger multiplies, because once leaders realize they can ignore one order, the door opens to redefining rights altogether. Who counts as dangerous? Who is labeled a terrorist? Those definitions suddenly become tools, not truths. Reports and analysts have warned that framing dissent as criminal is tactic authoritarian governments use to consolidate power. And here we're seeing the same playbook, just wrapped in legal jargon and national security language. This isn't about one immigrant or one case, it's about reshaping the system so that loyalty, not law, decides who gets to stay and who gets silenced. When Senator Murphy pushed her on free speech, Kristi Noem's silence became the loudest part of the hearing. He wasn't asking about obscure statutes or complicated visa rules. He was asking if a legal permanent resident, someone who lives, works, and pays taxes in America, could be deported simply for sharing a political opinion. A yes would affirm constitutional rights. A no would trigger outrage, but Noem wouldn't commit either way. By dodging, she created the chilling possibility that millions of people could lose their voice overnight, not because of crimes, but because of their opinions. That uncertainty is powerful. It makes people think twice before speaking out, which is exactly how censorship works, without ever writing it into law. The refusal to say of course they have rights was not a mistake, it was a calculated move to keep the door wide open. What Kristi Noem displayed sounded less like constitutional democracy and more like the warning signs we associate with authoritarian states. In those regimes, courts are treated as advisory, not binding. Leaders decide which rulings to obey and which to toss aside. Free speech exists only until it threatens power, and that's the echo we heard in this hearing. If a unanimous Supreme Court order can be ignored without consequence, then the rule of law becomes a suggestion, not a safeguard. Today it's a legal resident labeled as dangerous. Tomorrow it could be citizens whose only crime is criticizing those in power. Once the precedent is set, the slide accelerates quickly. Noem's testimony wasn't just clumsy, it was a glimpse into how fragile democratic norms become when officials test the boundaries and no one pushes back. That's not a warning for the future, it's a reality unfolding now. Every democracy faces stress tests, and this was one of them. Kristi Noem's refusal to acknowledge free speech rights or obey a unanimous Supreme Court ruling wasn't just about one case, it was about whether institutions still have the strength to enforce limits on power. Senator Chris Murphy pressed hard, but one senator cannot carry the weight of the Constitution alone. The real question is whether Congress, the courts, and the public are willing to hold leaders accountable when they openly defy the rules. Because if ignoring the Supreme Court becomes normalized, then the balance of powers collapses into the balance of who dares the most. Noem showed us what defiance looks like. Now the burden shifts to everyone else. Do we allow constitutional limits to be redefined by silence, or do we draw the line here before it disappears completely? Kristi Noem's testimony wasn't confusion, it was deliberate. She made a choice to treat the Supreme Court's ruling as optional, to dodge on free speech rights, and to frame obedience to the Constitution as negotiable. That is not a misstep, it's a strategy. And the longer it goes unchecked, the more normalized it becomes. Democracy doesn't collapse overnight, it erodes one ignored ruling, one unanswered question, one silent dodge at a time. That's why this moment matters far beyond one case. If officials can decide which laws apply to them, then the Constitution isn't the rulebook anymore, it's just a prop. And that should terrify every American. The clock is ticking on how we respond. If you believe law matters more than power, subscribe right now. If you want unfiltered truth, back us today, because silence here isn't neutral, it's surrender.